Well, this morning is going to be a little bit different than the other one, and I know I've said that so many times. I guess I've never done the same thing twice anyway. But I started thinking about some things that's going on in the world today, especially in Luke when Jesus said that in the end times, men's hearts are going to fail them, looking on the things that are coming. Now, what that is more or less stated in other terms is you're going to get so depressed that you're going to commit suicide by a heart attack, just looking at the things that are happening, that are coming on the earth. And so I thought about praying about how to deal with stress, how to help people deal with stress. Then all of a sudden, Judy threw a monkey wrench in my whole system last week. When I said I was going to deal with stress, and she said, I don't have any stress.
Well, Judy, you're for
You can leave early then.
So then I got to thinking, well, and don't take this the wrong way, but actually, the older you get, the less stress you have. There was this man in Trinity, Texas, where I was pastor for a while, and he was a rather successful, very successful man in Trinity. And he told me one day, he said, when I was going to buy a piece of property or do a project or something, it used to really bother me when it didn't work out. But now, if a project or a financial adventure doesn't work out, it doesn't bother me anymore. Now, I could also understand he didn't need it to start with. The second reason is, he said, things kind of work out all right anyway. And then I thought of another situation where a lady, I don't know if I mentioned it here, maybe I mentioned it at rehab, at cardiac. My wife told me, stop saying rehab. Start saying cardiac rehab. And I said, well, there was a lady that she had a lot of anger for people. And the counselor told her, said, well, write a letter, write it out, all the problems that you had with that person, and then throw it in the fire. And she said, well, what do I do with the letter? And yeah, she's talking about throwing the person that offended her in the fire, do something to them. But, as you get older, you just don't worry as much about things, it seems like to me, on a roundabout. But I had already committed myself to do it and already studied it, so I'm not going to change. But it is going to be a little considerably different. And I'll tell you a couple of things on the background of why I did this on my notes. The first thing is John 14:1, where Jesus said, let not your heart be troubled. Now, John 14 is my Wednesday chapter that I quote before I get out of bed. Don't let your heart be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me. Just don't let it worry you. And so I zeroed in on the word let for years. Lord, I don't want to, but how in the world do I let it? How do I not let things bother you? How do you not let stress get the best of you? Now, we know that stress is good. It saves your life a lot of times. But too much stress can go the other way. And so, as I usually do, I went over a lot of the things with Sharon before I started. And I went over the list of the problems that stress causes. Now, the problem is we've got adrenaline. So I'm going to give you some medical terms, but she told me don't go overboard on the medical terms. And so I said, well, it won't make any sense if I don't do some. But I don't want to go overboard, but I'm going to give you a couple. And cortisol is one of them. We know we got adrenaline. and I'll give you a little bit of background. I've got so many notes here that I'm going to go over it real fast, and then in questions I'll go back over it again in case some of the holes, because by not going over it fast, I might leave some holes that are not explained. We know that we have an adrenaline gland on top of the kidneys. Now that is probably pretty much common knowledge, so don't need to go on there. But when the proverbial line, or you see a snake, immediately the adrenaline hits and it shoots out adrenaline. And that gives you, in one sense, the fight or flight. You know, you got to decide real quick what to do. Now that's in reserve. That's already built up in the adrenaline gland. It's there right now. So you don't have to make it. It's there right now. But the doctor I was listening to and trying to figure this out said you got 10 minutes. And if things don't resolve in about 10 minutes, then cortisol sets in. And it does a lot of good things, but it does a whole lot of bad things. Blood pressure goes up, memory loss, serotonin quits, you're afraid, you don't know what to do, you feel alone, your memory goes, and your reasoning ability goes out. And so she asked me, she said, well, is there any good thing that cortisol does? And I said, up to this point, my study, I can't think of anything. Physically. Now, Merrill said he studied it. He might chime in here a little bit. There may be a few things that it does. But it jumps up. And I said, I got to think of an illustration to how to describe what cortisol does. And I could read some of this, but I'm going to try to do it by memory. But one of the things that we have in our body is homeostasis. Now what that does is the body likes to keep things on an even keel. And in how it operates, if it gets real cold, your body must maintain that temperature at 98.6 or 7 or whatever it is. So if you get real cold, you start shivering. Now that shivering will raise the body temperature up. If you're real hot, your homeostasis will start sweating to cool things down. Now your body likes equilibrium. It likes things to stay the same. And it maintains the same. But the way the doctor explained it was that I like to look at it like a top. It finally came to me. Actually, I was reading over it once again this morning, and when I was looking at that term, I said, I thought of a top. You remember how we used to have those round tops with a little needle at the bottom and you wind the string around it and you threw it? Mm-hmm. I assume you still can do that and find them. And that top starts spinning. And that spinning, the gyroscope, keeps it upright. But then as it starts losing speed, it loses its homogeneous, we call it, and then it starts wobbling back and forth. And it keeps wobbling. And eventually it falls over and stops. Now, that's more or less what cortisol does. It will cause the homeostasis to run out and stop. Now, there are several other things that I've thought about on this, of how I've come to this conclusion. I started praying about this, and in my own life, I want to mention, along with when cortisol pumps out, there's another thing that happens. And we'll get to this in a minute. But there are 4 brakes that try to slow down what cortisol is doing in the system. And one of them is a peptide. Now, I don't know how many of you are familiar with peptides. I wasn't earlier, till about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. And I started, you might think, I got to thinking, what are they going to think about me when I start doing this? And I know what some people are going to think about when Paul was discussing, giving his speech before the council there in Colossae, not Colossae, but for the court, the guy jumped up and said, "Paul, much learning has made you mad." And I thought, studying all this stuff, you've gone over the deep end. But anyway, we're gonna go there. So anyway, when peptide, you may be familiar with Ozempic. Ozempic came out a couple of years ago, and it is the peptide. We got hundreds of peptides going on in our body. Hormones and peptides control our body. You may think, and I may think, that it's willpower, but it's not. It's hormones and willpower. Hormones and peptides, they control us. Just about everything about us is controlled by a hormone or a peptide. So at any rate, I started looking at peptides, and Ozempic is the peptide that is reversing diabetes right now. It is a peptide that is stored in your lower intestine. It's made there. And when you eat a certain amount, a peptide, and I'll do this, GLP-1 is the name of it. And it sends a signal to your brain, stop eating. You've eaten too much. Now, it is the peptide that controls how much you eat. You may think you control it, but you don't, and I don't. And then there's another one that tells you to eat. And there's another one that tells you to stop eating. And whichever one is in control is whether or not you eat or don't eat. You may think you're in control, but it takes an enormous amount of willpower to overcome those two peptides. So the reason it got me interested in it, I know a few family members that take Ozempic, and I've got some friends that take Ozempic. And they said it is the miracle drug for diabetes. And so what it does, they synthesize it, just like they synthesize insulin. Insulin is a peptide, and it gives you the insulin that you need to control your diabetes, especially diabetes 1. And then they figured out, about diabetes type 2. So at any rate, forget that much. That's the peptides. So at any rate, peptides, people started taking it for weight loss. Millions of people. And if you're not a diabetic, or if your doctor doesn't prescribe it, it hits you back $1,000 a month to take it. And so it has some side effects. Two side effects. It also takes weight away from muscle and bones. So for every pound you lose a certain percentage of muscle and bone. I read one where it says for every pound you lose, you lose up to 40% of your muscle and 40% of your bone. Another one said 13% of bone, and so when you do lose that, depends upon how your age, you really don't have a lot of time to get all that muscle back, because you got to do a lot of physical exercise to get all that muscle back that you lost. But they say it's better to do that than to go blind with diabetes, or be amputated with diabetes, have an amputation, or have a kidney transplant. So while it does have some bad effects, it's better to overcome, stop eating to lose weight. Now what happened to me in Brazil, I got careless and put on some weight. Okay. Embarrassed to say how much, but it was about 40 pounds too much. And we have doctors all the time, and so I would ask them lots of questions. if any kind of problem I had, I'd ask them questions. And one of them said, if you're overweight that much, you have a 70% chance of developing diabetes type 2, if you're that far overweight. And so, I didn't know, at that time, there wasn't no Ozempic or anything to do. And so, mentally, I prepared myself to lose that 40 pounds. I watched people, we had a lot of volunteers, as you know, come, and I would watch them. I'd watch people eat. We had some people that could barely make through that door there. And I would watch them, and I was gonna write a book, a diet book. And this was gonna be the 3 chapters. One is, I discovered that people that were overweight ate more than people that were thin. That's gonna be my first chapter. The second chapter was gonna be those that were overweight ate faster than those that were thin. Now we all know that. And I discovered that people who ate fast knew that sooner or later that something in your mind was going to tell you to stop eating. And it usually takes about 20 minutes. So if I eat everything I can in 20 minutes, I won't feel guilty when it stops. Now, that's my deductions. And then so I started analyzing what I ate. I found out that I ate a second helping. And that second helping, I was eating enough for 2 people. So I stopped that. And within about 6 months, I lost 40 pounds. The second thing is I stopped eating a lot of desserts. And what I would do, I'd walk by and take a look at a piece of pie, and I would say, do I want that piece of pie or do I want my right foot? And then I went to the kidney doctor because of some other issues. And I said, look, if I have a heart attack, I'm either gonna go out or I'm gonna get better. But if I develop this diabetes, I'm gonna go out in pieces. And I really don't want that. Or I'm gonna go out blind. And so I really don't want that. So it was just willpower. And one of the friends that I have, he takes Ozempic. He lost 90 pounds. And he was headed back to the doctor. We've known them for a long time. He had this ablation because he had his heart. And they did a ablation to slow it down, but it didn't work. So he had to go back and have another one. So I went down to the hospital at 5 o'clock in the morning, down to Centennial with him that morning. He got in there, they went back, and we were set up. I was with his wife and his daughter, and we were set there to stay probably 5-6 hours while they did that surgery on him. Well, he came walking out in about 10 minutes. And they said, I don't need it. They said all that, I use the word fat, that I had inside was putting so much pressure on the heart that it was causing my problem. And when I lost all the weight, I don't have the problem anymore. So we all went home. So that's where the counter effects to Ozempic were bad, but dying of a heart attack was worse. And so he got the Ozempic. And my daughter-in-law is a pharmacist, and she said they can't keep Ozempic in the store because even though it's designed for diabetics, people are buying it to lose weight. And people have the money, California, they just buy that stuff like anything to lose the weight. So pharmaceutical company is doing good. Okay, so that's how I got where I am right now over the last couple of years. Studying 2 things hormones and peptides. I didn't even know peptides existed until just after I started looking at Ozempic. But it controls just about everything. Now, I've got another problem is I like to be in control. And I want to know what's controlling me. And so if peptide's in control, I'm going to know what peptides are doing to me. So we're not chasing many more rabbits. Okay, peptides, cortisol kicks out in 10 minutes. After, if your adrenaline doesn't handle the problem, cortisol jumps in. And cortisol said, we're going to solve this problem if we have to kill you to do it. And so it shoots out and it starts controlling things. Now this is the first thing that really caught me when the doctor that I was doing this, at the same time, the cortisol hits your system, there's another peptide that jumps out, and that's NPY, or peptide Y. And it's co-released with cortisol. And this is what the doctors, and it puts the brakes on cortisol. And this is what the doctor said. Now I'm just going to read this. Co-released, and basically tells the fat cell, that's what cortisol is hitting, and other organs in the body calm down. It tells cortisol, you better calm down. Put the brakes on it. You know, if you keep doing this, we're going to be in real trouble. That's what this peptide does to cortisol. If you keep doing this, we're going to be in real trouble. We're going to be like that top that stops spinning and flips over, or has some other serious problems. We can't keep things under control. So, and I'll just read what he says about Ozempic. It signals the brain for you to stop eating. You've eaten all you can. You've gone, this is how he explains it. He said, you've gone back to that all-you-can-eat table for the third time to get that pork chop. Now you're going back to the fourth time, and that pork chop that you're going to get now makes you nauseated. It has that much control over what you eat. You all eating something that you really love, and then you go back the second, third, fourth time. And by the third or fourth time, you say, I can't eat any more of this. Even the proverb says that. He said, the full person is nauseated over food. That's the old peptide working on you, telling you you've eaten too much. Now, the question that keeps coming back to my mind is my wife's question. Why in the world did God do this? Why did he do this? We all get good and perfect things from God, but now God is throwing all this cortisol in our system that is not doing much immediate good. It's not doing much good to us. But he's also given us breaks to stop this from going on. So why is it? I'll eventually get where we're going. But there are 4 breaks. And I'm going to mention one other word. Now, one of these things, some of this that comes to me is, you may know that our son had a brain tumor many years ago. And that's when I started studying the brain years ago. So it's not just immediately. So anything that has to do with the brain, I studied it and looked at it. Okay, there's something in our brain called the amygdala. Now that's the only part of the brain that I'm going to mention today. And this is what the doctor said. Amygdala, he said, now for your audience, is the fear center of your brain. The fear center of your brain. It is the stress center of the brain. And here we are talking about chronic stress. We've moved from just being afraid of that snake or that lion, and we can get away from it. Now, we've moved into chronic stress where you're in your house and you've got you've read about those stories about the person that had a den of rattlesnakes running underneath their house, or you've got about 5 or 6 rattlesnakes sleeping under your bed, in your house, crawling around in your walls. You don't know where they are. You don't know what they're going to do. Now you've moved from an immediate fear. Now you've moved to chronic stress, to chronic fear, that you don't know where it is, and you don't know how to get rid of it, and it's there.
Is that like paranoia, Ray?
Yeah, I would call it that too. Yeah, yeah. You're just generally afraid of something. Like Jesus said, looking on the world, seeing what's happening, you're afraid. You're fear, and it's overcoming you. Blood pressure's up through the roof. You can't think, and it's just everything has gone haywire. Okay, so why does all that happen? Now, sometimes when you pray about something, you ask God to reveal things to you, He reveals a whole lot more than what you really wanted to know, Yeah, there's a whole lot more out there that solves that problem that's going on. So, I often wondered why, when the judgment or the chastisement on Adam and Eve changed their body in a way. We know how it changed the woman's body. Now for Adam and Eve, the world changed. He said, no longer are you're going to plant your garden and everything's going to come up great, and you're going to be able to, it's going to be a lot of weeds in there. You're going to have to work hard. And you're going to have to worry, is it going to rain? A farmer gets a lot of stress when it doesn't rain. How it's going to come up. So he's living in stress and when he plants that seed in the ground, he's got no guarantee that everything's going to come up. He's got stress all year long. He's living constant stress. So what do you do in stress? Now think about that for a minute. How do you handle stress? Well, these 4 breaks that the amygdala shoot out. Now, if he used this illustration. I'm telling you where I got the illustration from. You've got 4 wheels on your car, and each wheel's got a brake. Now, what happens if one brake doesn't work, and you're headed towards a cliff? Your car will stop. Now, it may make you a little nervous, but your car will stop. What happens if 2 brakes don't work? You probably will stop. But if the 2 brakes are on that don't work on one side and not the other side, your car probably gonna spin around and flip over. Now, what happens if 3 brakes don't work? Now you're getting into more trouble. Now, what happens if all 4 brakes don't work?
You go with cliff.
Now, he used, I saw this part in the scene, but I didn't watch the whole movie. He used the scene Thelma and Louise. You ever, Louise, yeah. Did you ever see that part?
Yeah.
Well, I didn't see the whole show, but I did see that part. He said, there you are. No brakes working, and your cortisol is throwing stuff out right, left, and center. You're over the hill. Now, what are the 4 brakes? The first brake, and I'm not going to try to explain. I don't even know if I could completely understand it to explain it. But the cortisol starts messing with your brain, sending all these hormones, peptides, and everything in it, and it shuts down your frontal cortex. Now you know what's there, maybe. That's your reasoning ability. So your reasoning ability starts going out. And you don't reason things right. Now, one of our counselors at Brentwood, one of our assistants, had a brother that was messing up all over the place. He's just making one mistake after another. And the counselor said, well, listen, a boy's frontal cortex doesn't fully develop till he's about 24. In other words, he doesn't know how to reason. He's still an adolescent. But wait till he gets to be 24. Well, sure enough, he got 24, settled down. He's got a good paying job. The second break is that I'm not going to mention the part of the brain that does this, but anyway, the part of the brain that controls your memory, it starts going bad. So your memory's gone. That would help you with the rattlesnakes. Well, the last time I was faced with a lion, I just shot the thing. Well, I forgot about it. You don't remember how you solved the last problem you had, or you don't think it works. Now, the next part of the brain that deals with, and it goes all over your body, is the part that controls serotonin. Now, you may have remembered something about serotonin. It is part of they make the drug out of this, and it's called an antidepressant. They call it a retake on something or another. Now, I sound like I know what I'm talking about, but I'm just repeating it. But anyway, it starts putting serotonin back in your system. Now, let me read a little bit about what you don't realize how many times I had to type in a dictionary to find out what all these things were. It makes sense. Serotonin is a chemical that carries messages between nerve cells in the brain throughout your body. Serotonin plays a key part in your body as mood, sleep, digestion, nausea, wound healing, bone health, blood clotting, and sexual desire. Serotonin levels get too high or too low, basically your little top is wobbling pretty bad. And you have to get it back. You have to get the top spinning again. The last one is a hormone in a certain part of your body that is the safety hormone. There's a part of our brain that deals with safety. And basically, give it a real quick shot, it transmits feelings of safety. So here we are, the cortisol is shooting all this stuff out through the amygdala. It interferes with your reasonability. It interferes with your memory. It interferes with your feeling good with serotonin. And not only top of that, you don't feel safe. Now, if none of those brakes are working, you're in pretty serious trouble. So my thinking is, okay, now he does all that. So how can I develop a message that will help us overcome these? Because we do have control over each one of these things. We do have some control over them. I mean, it's not like we have no control. We have control. Now, the passage that we looked at last week where Paul explained what it's going to be like, how the dead in Christ are going to rise first, and and he said, comfort one another with these words. Comfort one another. In other words, go back to peace. Don't let, one of the things that really gives us stress is not knowing the future, in my thinking. He doesn't mention this, but that's one of the things that I think we really have trouble with not knowing the future. So, what about reasoning ability? I started going through the Bible in my mind, thinking about all the things, where was reasoning important that calmed people down. And I thought of Judges 13:23. Don't need to write. If I wrote down all these, we'd be here forever looking at all these verses. But you remember when the angel came and told Manoah, his wife, that they're going to have a son, and he's going to be, and then she went and told Manoah, the guy told me I'm going to have a son. They didn't have a son, and this is what I'm supposed to do. And he said, well, next time this fella comes around, come get me. I want to talk to him. So he did. He came back, and his wife went and got Manoah, and came around, and they started talking to him. And then the next thing you know, he said, let us make an offering. And so the angel touched the offering, it burned up, and the angel went up in the sky in the smoke. And then Manoah, her husband said, we're going to die, we're going to die, we're going to die, because we have seen the Lord, we're going to die. And what did she do? She said, Manoah, calm down and just think a minute. If we're going to die, how are we ever going to have this son? You're not thinking straight, man. So he got so overwhelmed that he lost his reasoning ability. And so some of the other reasoning abilities, if we think we're all alone, remember all those verses where in Acts said, if he that spared not his own son, isn't he going to take care of us? He's going to take care of you. I mean, he let his son die for you. Don't you think he's going to take care of you? You think he's going to just drop you off the side of the mountain? And so the other thing is, everything's going to work out for good. I have problems. I mean, I got a handful of problems right now. I went and talked to a fellow, the transmission on that Honda, bought it brand new a few years ago, and it's got a reputation of going out. So I went and talked to a fellow. If I had to replace that transmission, how much would it cost me? Well, best we can say, somewhere between $6,000 and $7,000 to replace it. And so I asked him, I said, what should I do? Should I replace it or buy a new one? One mechanic said, I'd put the money on a new one. I wouldn't try to fix that thing, because the next one's going to probably be the same problem. And so I've got to figure that out. Now, the Lord, I told you my little part about the transmission when I went to Fort Worth. I think I told you that I kept that. Well, Lord, you're going to supply it. You're going to figure out how to do this. Now, another verse is, first of all, we rejoice. That's how we handle cortisol, is rejoice. Now, I know y'all went through the book of James, and in James 1, he says, rejoice when you fall in all kinds of trials and temptations, because they're going to work for you good. So, and what they reveal areas in your life where you need to grow. And so, you really may think I'm strange now, but I wake up in the morning, I got a problem. I say, praise the Lord, I got a problem, Lord. You're going to teach me how to grow more. You know? It all depends upon how you look at it. And the other thing is, Isaiah 26:3 says, perfect love casts out all fear. And so what I have learned is that every problem in my life has revealed to me areas of my life where my love for God's not perfect. And so rather than focusing on how to solve that problem, I focus on how to perfect my love for God. And so it becomes a blessing. What James said, rejoice when you fall into all kinds of problems. And then the big one, I believe, is in Psalm 56. What time I am afraid, I will trust in you. And so I look at it. Cortisol, next time you jump up, that's a signal for me to trust in the Lord more. And so I'm not going to get mad at God for making cortisol anymore. Because honestly, I can't see any benefit in it. It just causes my top to fall over. But if I focus on what Paul says, rejoice always, in everything give thanks. Because as I throw back my memory on things that have happened to me in my life, there's not one of them destroyed me. Every problem strengthened me. Now, time's up, but I do need feedback, because this is the first time I've done this with that much medical terms, and I'm a little worried that I went overboard. But there is a relation between our body, mind, and soul. They're all interconnected. And as I understand more about one, it helps me to understand more about spiritual. Any questions?
I got one, Ray.
Sure.
I know, we don't know how God creates us. I assume there's deficiencies in everything. But do you think God creates enough cortisol in a person for them to handle situations at given times?
Looking at it that way, I think so. The cortisol is, the cortisol is the stuff that produces stress. There's a counterbalance in our system, in everything. Just using a simple illustration about overeating, there's systems in our body that tells us to stop eating. Now, whether or not we listen to it or not, that's another thing. But I think there's always sufficient. My God shall supply all your needs according to His riches and glory. And so, anytime I have a stressful situation, I'll say, Lord, you've already got it supplied. Our water heater's going out. You know, I mean, every day if you own a house, every day you wake up, you've got a stressful situation.
Right.
So the Lord's already got that supplied somehow or another. But I think there is a counterbalance there. Then the other thing is that it says the wise person will foresee the evil and prepare himself. Now, we had an accident in our car in Brazil, and so they sent us another car down. And the fellow that had that car did not take care of it. He had no spare tire and 3 Maypop tires on that car. I mean, yeah, and so I got to think, this is dumb. And I'm not driving way out into the middle of boonies with this car. And so there is an element in which we prepare ourselves for some problems. I mean, if I took that car out in the middle of nowhere and had a flat, and I say, God, why did you let me have a flat? You know, it wasn't God's fault. I mean, I was driving around with 3 rotten tires. So I have to prepare for things ahead of time. So the answer to your question, the best I can answer it right now, is God already has supplied all your needs. If I got out there, the Lord would have told me, next time, do a little bit better preparation. Right. It's not my fault that tire's flat, that you don't have a spare tire. It's your fault. And so that goes back to Proverbs 15, where it says, the person that listens to the rebukes of life is a wise person. There are certain rebukes that happen to us in life that teaches us to be prepared for things in the future. And so that is the best I can answer that right now. But the answer is that God's already prepared everything. And I sit quiet in the morning and I say, Lord, you know, what do I need to do? You know, how am I going to handle this? Are there any things that I need to think about in the future that I need to do now to prepare me for problems in the future? Now, I got insurance running up the top of my head, but, you know, that's as much as I know how to take care of. That was a good question, though. It helps me think things through. Well, I hope this relieves stress. Because if you know where it comes from, and you know that God caused it when He made us, that means you know He's got a solution for it. Merle, you got anything to say?
No, I think you pretty much covered it without going into a whole lot of scientific discussion. Cortisol does have pretty negative effects after a period of time. It has a purpose. It's not in there by accident, but it can, after a while, have some negative effects. It can disable your immune system, for one thing.
No.
It can cause muscular degeneration because it inhibits the repair of protein. So it can do a lot of damage. But what it does is, the reason it kicks in is because it converts let's see, how does it work? It converts amino acids directly to carbohydrates. That's what the whole idea of it is. And then after that, it doesn't really serve any purpose. I think all the effects are negative from there. I had to go back in my textbook and study that because I had that on.
Well, he said he studied it all this week.
Yeah,
so
I
I
had-
had to give him a chance to say.
Well, was on the quiz that I was studying a while back, and it's not all bad, but anyway, if you ever study anything to do with biology, you're gonna run right into that, it'll come up.
But my biggest thing is, it creates enough inside of you. What time I am afraid, I will trust in you. And that's what cortisol does.
Keeps everything in balance.
Well, it's catabolic, and it counteracts anabolic activity. And that's the reason it affects your muscle health and all that, because the hormones that keep your muscles healthy are anabolic. So if you've got catabolism going on, that's totally the opposite. It'll work against the normal processes that keep you healthy.
Well, we might invite a doctor in next time. But,
Who trusts the medical profession?
but the best way I know how to explain it was that it attacks the homeostasis position of the body. If you don't bring that back under control, your top will wobble. Well, I'm finished. Let's pray. Father, thank you for the day. Thank you for your perfect plan for our lives. And thank you, Lord, that everything is working out for your glory, for our good, to glorify you. And I do pray for the people that we've mentioned today, Steve's son. Just really give him wisdom now and understanding how to make whatever changes you've planned for him to make. Be with Connie and Steve, bless them, give them peace and calmness as well. And help us to just walk in your spirit that we might honor and glorify you. For we pray in Christ's name, amen.